Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. I'm your host, Nick Cegelski, joined with my co-host, Jen Allen Knuth, and today we have Michelle at Procore. She is an enterprise account executive, and this was one of my favorite episodes in the history of 30 Minutes to President's Club. Jen, why should people listen?
This is one of the best episodes I've ever heard. What Michelle gets really into is how you show up and deliver an exceptional on-site meeting with your client, something many of us in tech have not yet had to do because we were selling in COVID. So there's so much to learn, whether you've done them 100 times or it's your first one coming up. Michelle drops some fire on this episode.
And a 3, a 2, a 1, Texas Hold'em.
This ain't Texas.
All right, Michelle, welcome to the show. We start every single episode with your top 3 actionable takeaways, so let's get your 3.
Number 1, do targeted call prep. Before every call with a customer or prospect, I'm pulling a Salesforce report that tells me what similar companies I've worked with before or another AE at my company has worked with before, what those customers have bought, when they bought, and why they bought, and using that information to then frame up the conversation with this new prospect.
Beautiful. What's
Number 2? Don't use bullet points in your follow-up. The beauty of the number system is when you call your prospect or your customer after the meeting and can say, hey, on point number 3, subpoint 1, maybe if you have subpoints, it's really easy for you to go through an email and stay organized as you're talking to your prospect and your customer.
Beautiful. All right. Round us out. Give us bullet point number 3.
Tip number 3, do bring something to write on and write with to your on-site meetings. For SaaS sellers, it might seem totally counterintuitive to bring paper and pens and pencils to meetings, but to help people stay engaged for both your prospect or your customer and for yourself, write everything down on paper and encourage the people in your meeting to write everything down on paper too as well.
Amazing. So after I have gotten on my electric bicycle, gone to my friendly neighborhood Office Max and bought some paper and pens, we were talking on the pre-show and you were telling me that you've done over 100 on-site meetings. And when you get on-site with a customer, your close rate skyrockets. And I was asking you about your on-site meetings. And I was thinking, okay, maybe you show up for 45 minutes, you meet and greet and you leave. And you said, no, I'll sometimes be there the entire day. There are times that we'll have 6-hour on-site meetings with a customer. And so can you just start and talk to me about these 6-hour on-sites? Give me some context around where do they happen in sales cycle? What's the purpose of them? And give me maybe the high level of what gets covered in one of those 6-hour on-sites.
For a longer form on-site, it's usually a little bit deeper in the sales process. So you're probably somewhere in the stage 3 evaluation zone of your sales cycle. Often I've used on-site meetings, pitched an on-site meeting as a way to get from the discovery phase of a deal into a deeper evaluation phase of a deal. Also a great way to get wide and to get high. If you're in a deal and you're siloed and maybe you're just working with a few people and it's important to get wide or higher in your deal, an on-site meeting is a great way to do that. It also adds a ton of value for your potential customer. So usually what these longer form meetings look are food, a piece of paper for everybody, pens, pencils, and a lot of content. Typically, I try to organize my content into a few categories, answering 3 questions. The questions are, does this vendor, that they're asking this to us, the questions are, does this vendor have the tools I need to be successful? Do they have the partnership that I want a long-term vendor to offer me? And do they have a plan to implement me to be successful? So those are the 3 kind of questions that I think prospects are thinking or should be thinking as they're looking at a new vendor, and what I try to answer and organize the day around.
Let's say you're talking with Jen. Jen is your prospect, right? And you've had maybe 1 or 2 discovery meetings. You've identified a problem that you can solve for Jen. Jen's talked about wanting to do a bigger evaluation, maybe look at a couple different folks. You know that a 6-hour on-site will be impactful for their business and for the deal. How do you pitch or position that on-site to Jen? How do you explain it to her?
As with everything we pitch or position as salespeople, it almost always comes down to what's been important to Jen, what's been most important to Jen, and how we can align our resources internally at our company to what Jen's needs are. Most of the time, the vast majority of the time, it's confirming, do we have a fit to solve the top priority problems that Jen has at her business? And so to answer that question, you usually need a committee of people, org commitment to collaborate and look into potential solutions that our vendor can offer. So for Jen, if I'm speaking with her and she's wanting probably help understanding how to evaluate something, what I would say is, hey, listen, I would love to come to your office and bring my team. I'll bring some people from product, some people from customer support, and some of my technical resources. We'll bring you lunch. We'll probably bring some snacks and breakfast, take you to an Astros game after, assuming I don't live in Houston, but apparently Jen does. I don't know. That came out of nowhere. We'll take you to an Astros game after, but we can accomplish a lot in a 6-hour time together in person, way more than we can in 6 hours worth of Zoom. Do you think your team would be open to something like that?
Okay, so just to give us a little context on your sale, our listeners a context. So up until this point, you're typically working with one person, multiple people. Like, is that meeting on site the first time you're getting exposed? Talk us through that a little bit, just so we have context there.
So sometimes if I'm working with one person and I know that we need to get wider in the org and higher, and they know that they need to get wider in the org if they're going to initiate change, then an onsite's a great opportunity to get wider. Recently, one thing I did that was really valuable for my team as well as the prospect was prior to our onsite meeting, I sent out a survey to the potential end users of our system. 10 questions. Took them probably 10 minutes to fill out, yes or no questions. I made it as simple and easy as possible so that we could get as many responses as we could. Sent it in Google Forms. And it basically just asked a lot of questions about current state. I think doing that really encouraged people to show up to the meeting because they knew what we were going to address. They knew what we were going to talk about. And then I was able to bring them back information that was packaged up really nicely for them too. Sometimes we're with one person in the beginning and then we use this meeting as a way to get wider in the account and a little higher. Other times we already have the benefit of being with a committee and we use this to get even wider beyond the committee and into getting some end user groundswell moving.
Yeah. So I used to have meetings like this also when I sold ERP systems to law firms. We would do the full day on site. We'd bring a couple people from our team. And my biggest learning from those was the work that you do to set expectations and the work that you do before this meeting sets up success for when you get there. And so to your point, things like that survey set you up for a way more productive meeting. I want to ask about some of the other things you're doing pre-meeting once they've agreed to it, but this is a nuanced question. That Google survey or form that you sent out, was this like multiple choice questions? Was it like free form text boxes? What were you putting in that survey?
All multiple choice. The reason is if I were a buyer as an end user, as a salesperson at a software company, if I get one more survey that has 1 million long form answers that I have to spend all this time, I'm probably not going to fill it out very thoughtfully. But if someone sends me a survey with a bunch of really quick answers, I could do that. It takes me 5 minutes, no problem. So I feel very strongly that everything we do as salespeople, we need to make things easier for our prospects and customers and take the burden off of them of evaluating and almost offer ourselves as a project manager of their evaluation. So I made it as easy as possible. And we got a high rate of people filling that out. And I think it was because it was all multiple choice and like true, false, yes, no. I think 1 or 2 questions had a couple words needed for an answer, but that was it. Maybe 10 questions total.
So I love this idea of being so mindful about the effort for a buyer to do anything, any job to be done in buying. So let's stay on that for a second. If you are in one of those scenarios where you've only worked with one person in the business, ask that person going out and saying, I want everybody to spend 6 hours with this complete stranger is another high effort task. So what are some of the things that you'd recommend to sellers to do to make that job of getting other people on board for spending that time together a little bit easier for your buyer or your champion?
I think the first thing is having clarity of mind about what the value is for your buyer to do a meeting like this. So I think starting from having a customer-centric mindset about why it would benefit them to do it is really helpful, and actually being able to verbalize that goes into the prep as well. If you're able to verbalize really succinctly for your technical solutions engineer that's coming to the meeting, your manager, your CS person, that's going to be really valuable. that thesis statement about why the customer is doing this or the prospect or the buyer is doing this.
Can you give an example of what that might sound like?
Okay, Jen, it sounds to me like what's really important to you is that we get buy-in from the end users, that we make sure that this is going to work technically, and that everybody feels really excited about our roadmap and that our company's visions align with where we're going in the future. What I found from doing all these evaluations of our software in the past has been really valuable is for us to get in a room together so that we can not only dig in and actually uncover a lot of the nuances of what our service will provide to you, but also that we can meet each other and that your team can feel the energy of our team and get to understand what our customer service feels like and looks like, what our product teams care about, and make sure that we're aligned culturally. That tends to be really important for companies like yours. What's your take on something like that? I like ending it softly like that. I don't want to hard close anyone on an onsite, but I like ending it on a, what's your take? What's your opinion? Does that seem valuable to you? Because I think you learn a lot. And the best thing we can get in a deal is close one. The second best thing is clarity. And if we can find out really quickly, if the answer to an onsite is no, why is that? Because you might not have a deal there. Is this real? If it's not real, it's okay. But if it's not real, it'd be great to know now versus later.
Fast forward to the day of the meeting. Here we go. You've gotten on your airplane. You flew to Houston to visit Jen.
Not my territory, by the way.
Not where I live.
We're going to pretend Jen has moved to Houston and there's a great Astros game that night. You land in Houston. You've got a meeting. Talk to me about hour by hour how that day goes, and then we'll zoom in on specific pieces.
Fun. Okay. On-site day. So the day before the on-site, I have everything printed out and ready. So I have papers printed out that I'm going to hand out to everybody there. I always have extras. If there's 15 people that are coming to this meeting, then I print out 25 pieces of paper. It's almost always one piece of paper. I don't want it to be distracting. And the purpose of the paper is to keep us focused and give someone a note-taking device. So it's usually a product list or something like that. The day before the meeting, I also have everybody who's coming to the meeting from my team has a prep document that has names, titles, LinkedIn links for every single person coming to this meeting. They have my notes about what the customer cares about, why we're doing this meeting. They have notes about other software that's in place that might play nicely with our software. All of that stuff is all prepped. Everybody's seen it the day before. Everybody knows about it. Usually the customer's seen exactly what my internal team has seen. The day before the meeting, I've also put on my own calendar the specific time blocks of drive from hotel to the bagel shop down the street, pick up X amount of bagels. If you're late to an onsite, it's the worst thing in the whole entire world. So morning of, I wake up super early, have some coffee, and this I think is the most important thing you can do. I put on Beyonce and I make sure that the vibes are so good and so fun in my own hotel room and in my rental car. And my technical person who gets in the car with me is going to leave it on Beyonce, but I'm loving it. So we get the Beyonce vibes going. Really important, genuinely. No sad music before an onsite, absolutely not. We go get the bagels, we go get the food, we have everything ready. By the way, I also feel very strongly about this. I always wear like a buttoned up shirt and professional pants. And then I try to get really fun shoes, like a really bright pink with a big bow, because I sell to construction. So I want to, I don't know, bring in a fun big bow or something. And it's always a talking point. Everybody wants to talk about it. Sometimes I'm the only woman in the room and we're talking about my shoes. And I think that's just like perfect. So then you get there early, start setting up, make sure all your tech is set up. You have your bagels over on the side, hopefully from a local bagel shop. Bagels, donuts, something salty is good because it gets people moving. And then when you start the meeting, people are going to start trickling in. You walk up to every single person, shake their hand, repeat their name back to them so that it helps you remember. Every single person, shake their hand, repeat their name back to them, and make sure you clock who's who. I think it's really important to clock who's who in the room because what you're going to find during the meeting is titles don't mean that much in terms of influence. People with varying ranges of titles are very influential in these deals. So I want to know everyone's name, make a connection with them, and make sure they feel important.
We're going to keep going here, but just to recap what I'm hearing thus far. We're getting in the day before. generally. You're getting everything printed the day before, so there's no running around last minute. You have a very specific outfit that you're wearing with an element that stands out so that people remember you and you have a talking point, and you are going to get bagels from a local bagel shop as opposed to a Panera Bread, it sounds. One of the things that I really liked that you did, that I've made this mistake before, is it sounds like you've got an agenda for this meeting for probably, okay, from 8 to 10, or I don't know, from 9 to 11, there's going to be conversation and breakfast. From 11 to 12, there's going to be a demo of a certain module. 12 to 1, lunch. 1 to 2, demo of a different module. 2 to 3, customer success conversation, etc. You have different sessions, and my guess is the room sometimes changes in terms of who comes in for different pieces. I've made the mistake before of my meeting getting thrown off because I just had a full 8-hour block on my calendar as opposed to those individual blocks. And I have made the mistake of not plotting drive time on my calendar. And I'll never forget, I flew to Austin, Texas, and I had a meeting that my director and I, we were hanging out in a poke shop, just like chilling, catching up. And we showed up at the meeting right when it was supposed to start, as opposed to early for technical setup. So you are 100% right. That has to be done. So we're in the car, your technical person enters, you're blasting Texas Hold'em, you arrive at their office, you walk in, you've shaken hands, you've repeated Jen's name after she greeted you, you've clocked who matters. Talk to me about what happens the rest of the day.
This is the fun part. Everybody sits down and they look to you because you're leading the meeting. And this is your opportunity to set the agenda, let everyone know what the expectations are for the meeting, and then start introductions. I think introductions are the best part of this meeting because what you can do is use this moment to make sure you're super clear on who's in the room and what they care about most. Every single onsite I have, even if it's the 4th or 5th onsite with the same company, I say, okay, everyone, let's go around the room. Everybody tell me, what's your name? What do you do for XYZ company? And what's most important to you to get out of this meeting today? Everybody goes through and says 1 or 2 things. And sometimes if people pause, I say, it could be anything. It could be about something technical. It could be about a competitor. It could be about my pink flowery shoes. It could be about anything. And give people an opportunity to laugh a little bit. It's lighthearted. We're going to have a fun onsite. But what I do then on my piece of paper, because I don't have my laptop open during these onsites ever. I don't want people to be distracted themselves, and I don't want to be distracted either. I want to be really present. And if I have my laptop open, I will be on Slack or on Nordstrom's website. So my laptop's shut, I have my notebook open, and every person who introduces themselves, I write down their name, write down what they do, and I write down what they care about the most. That way, as we're going through these intros, sometimes it's 30 people, and it's worth the 30 minutes to do this. You're going through these intros and you're seeing the themes and you're seeing the things that people care about. And sometimes you're looking at it and you're going, wow, last time I was here, this is not what people were talking about. And now here's what we're talking about. And it's 3 pages back in my notebook. But regardless, you're giving everybody a moment where they're free to open up and say something. And that then opens the floodgates for the rest of the meeting. What you don't want to do is start off as the Michelle show or as the vendor show where this meeting is all about us. We want this meeting to be all about our prospect, all about our customer. And so by allowing everybody to speak and actually asking everybody to speak, oftentimes I'll say, okay, Nick, let's hear from you. Jen, let's hear from you. And I'll invite people to say something. That just opens the door so that the rest of the meeting, they're able to be vocal. So I think that's one of the most simple, basic, and critical parts of doing these meetings in person.
So then when it comes to the agenda, are you waiting until after introductions and then listening to what comes up in the introductions to then say, okay, based on this, here's my agenda? Or how do you do it? I don't want to feed an answer, but
usually what will happen is the agenda will be set. So product agenda, we're going to go through these few products, whatever it might be. And almost always people's things that they want to talk about, I have some sense of before. I know before from some pre-discovery work. What that does for me is allows me then to, let's say, Jen, you said, Michelle, I really want to understand how your change order tool works. And I say, okay, great, Jen. Now that I have that written down, once we get to that part of the process, I'm going to say, Jen, you said it was one of your top priorities to understand how our change order tool works. Before we get into this tool, can you give me a refresh on how are you managing change now? What's your change order process look like today? And what's wrong with it? Why isn't that working? And then we can get into our tool. So it gives me an opportunity to sprinkle in intentional discovery during the actual meeting because of that pre-work and the intros.
I could not let you ask a question, Nick, before saying how much I love that. You think about a 6-hour meeting, right? I'm sure we've all sat in boring 6-hour meetings where you just slowly fade into like, I don't care anymore. What a great way to keep your audience engaged and to just absolutely demonstrate that you were active listening, not going through the motions, but actually asking for a purpose. I could not love that tip more. Sorry, I just had to gush over that.
I'm learning a lot here, and this is taking me back to like when I would sell the ERP stuff. And so I'm just like, oh man, I wish I had this episode years and years ago. You mentioned that you're bringing a couple different people from your team to this meeting. You mentioned customer success person might be there. You're probably bringing a solutions engineer, maybe two, depending upon the complexity of what you're demonstrating. What are those people doing when you're presenting? And what are you doing when they are presenting, other than humming Crazy in Love?
One of the solutions engineers that I work with all the time, he and I talk about this a lot because we talk a lot while each other is presenting. We interject, we ask questions. And the reason that we're able to do that is we've done a lot of meetings together. We've got it under our belt. We know how to do that. But we also are able to get on the same page before the meeting in a really great way. I think part of being an AE is being the quarterback, being in the driver's seat, calling your shots, and then sticking to it. And so with one of my SEs, prior to every meeting, I always tell them, this is what I think we should do in terms of our energy and our vibe in the meeting. And specifically what I mean is saying, hey, this is a serious group. Let's be serious. Or, hey, this group is going to interrupt a ton. They're going to joke around a ton, and it's going to be a party. Let's go with it. Let's meet them where they're at. And so a lot of it is setting the stage ahead of time with the SE. But my SE, when he's talking product, I'll interrupt him and say, hey, 1 second, Grady. I think Jen had a question that we went over in the intros about change orders. Can we hear what she had to say about that before we actually dive in? I've been in sessions with other salespeople where it's a little more strict about who talks when. And there's all sorts of different ways that success looks, I think. But I want my onsites to be highly collaborative with the customer. And so I think that means I need to model that by being highly collaborative with my team on my side as well.
Just from talking to you, it's very clear you run an amazing on-site meeting. But if you think back to early Michelle days when you were first doing it, I've certainly led meetings where you have that realization, you're like, I'm losing the room. Has that ever happened to you? And if so, what do you do to pivot in those moments?
Yes, it's definitely happened.
Okay, good. You're human.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Had this one meeting that totally went off the rails and I lost everybody. And it was just because we didn't do great discovery. We just didn't, and it's not even that we didn't do great discovery. We didn't even do good enough discovery. We really didn't know what people cared about that were in the room. So we were talking about stuff that they didn't really care about, and it wasn't like the top priority thing. And I remember I just stopped it and I said, call me crazy, tell me if I'm wrong, but are we just like blowing it right now? I was like, are we just bombing? And everybody laughed and it lightened everything up. And it was like, yeah, we just don't, that's not a fit for us. That piece of the product's not a fit for us. And it was really great because my SC and I were able to say, okay, scrap it. This is your time. We lose people when we focus on our company, our solution, but we keep people when we're focused on their business, their priorities, their problems, their stuff, because that's what we're talking about, is enabling their businesses. We're not talking about buying our software. We're talking about what their business needs and how we can support that. So I think that's when we lose people, is when we start presenting and we stop collaborating.
Man, there's so much more that I want to ask you about what goes in this meeting. We're definitely going to have to get you back on the show, Michelle. We're running out of time. I want to ask you about after the meeting. I presume that when you walk out of that boardroom and you get into the fresh air of the street, the lovely air of Houston in the middle of July, there's some intention in terms of what happens after the meeting. So talk to me about the debrief with your team and then the follow-up with the customer.
I am a big believer, if any of my teammates, which I'm sure many of them will see this, they'll laugh at this part. I am a huge believer in celebration and recognition. And so the very first thing I ever do is high five my SE, my CS partner, and just talk to them about what they brought that was so valuable to that meeting. And I think that's the most important thing. These are jobs. These are just jobs. And we're doing our best. And everybody I work with does their best. And at the end of the day, we're spending time away from our families to go travel, to go do this job. And I want people to feel, if they're traveling with me, I want people to feel super appreciated, super valued. And like, I'm so glad that they're there, because I am, because it's a gift to me that these people are working with me and doing this. So first and foremost, high fives, celebrations for job well done and for good work. Then from there, it's okay, what does everyone else think are the best next steps, from my solutions engineer to my CS partner to me? Let's sit down and talk about this. What do we need to do? What does the customer need for us? Usually it's pretty clear. Customer told us, we collaborated on it. That's usually not that hard. We almost always leave that meeting with a scheduled next step, that this is what we need to validate next. And these are the ways that we're going to really determine if our solution's right for you. So usually that part's not that hard. Finally, after that, I always the next day send a follow-up email that has those notes in it about, here's what we talked about. And I keep it simple. It doesn't need to be some long, crazy, people aren't going to be impressed by a long email. They're just going to not read it. So it doesn't have to be long, but I send bullet points. Here's what we covered. Here's what we talked about. Here's our outstanding items. Here's our next steps, and try to make it really organized so I can project manage it. And then I call as many people as I can and thank them for their time and ask them what they thought. And that is the most valuable thing I think we can do after that meeting, is call everybody, every single person, no matter who they are. If they don't answer, it's fine. Leave a voicemail. Tell them, I just want to say thank you for your time yesterday. Would love to get your feedback at some point. But you just get gold after that. People know you. They trust you. They're a little more comfortable with you. They've met you in person. They've shaken your hand. They've not laughed at your stupid joke. So they're open to giving you the real feedback, which is really great.
That is one of the most fire multi-threading tips I've ever heard. You met all of these people, you call them, you thank them, you ask for feedback, and 17 minutes later, you've got a next step with this person, and you've talked to this person, and you've figured out what that person cares about. That is really good. Michelle, we're going to end on a high note. I got to move to our final question now. So we've talked about a lot of really great things salespeople should be doing. My last question flips that one on its head, and it's going to ask you about a shouldn't. And so my final question is, what is one bad habit that you see a lot of salespeople exhibiting that you think they need to break because it hurts them more than it helps?
Dishonesty about the reality of your deal. I think the best thing a salesperson can do is hold your deal with open hands. If it doesn't close, you're probably not going to die. But I think the worst thing I see salespeople do is get defensive about deals, and they don't actually look at their deal really honestly, and don't actually look at their deal and ask themselves, why won't this close? And what could get in the way of this one? The worst thing a salesperson can do is convince themselves that something's going to close. It's not going to close. It just creates more heartache for us, and salespeople have so much heartache.
A lot of heartache, but that's what we have Beyonce for, to get over it and power through. Michelle, thank you for joining us. Everybody stick around for a 60-second recap coming up soon. Your top 4 actionable takeaways from this episode with Michelle. Number 1, do not underestimate the impact of recognition of your SE. She gives a high five to all of her subject matter experts who come to these onsites and take time away from their family to present to her deal. I have seen the power of this. When you make your SEs feel special, they will go above and beyond for your deals. This has a bigger impact than pretty much any other sales tactic out there. Do this, and I promise you will make more money. Number 2, the number 1 multi-threading approach post-meeting. Shocker, pick up the phone and call as many people as you can who you met at that meeting. First, thank them for their time, and then 2, ask them for some feedback. This will lead to great discovery and next steps, and it will help you develop relationships all across the account.
Number 3, when you make the suggestion to your champion to bring folks together for an on-site meeting, be very prescriptive around what's in it for them, but use Michelle's tip To close with it surfaces skepticism, any concerns, so that you're not forcing a next step down their throat. And number 4, use a pre-meeting survey to ask questions about the client's current state to all meeting participants. One of her best tips here was to make it very easy to respond. Use multiple choice questions, yes or no questions, true and false questions, rather than high effort open text fields. Nick, what can listeners do to help out 30 Minutes to Presence Club today?
Folks, sadly, we didn't have any cowboy hats or pink boots on this episode, but if you want to see our smiling faces and watch 30 MPC in full Technicolor, we've actually started putting these episodes on YouTube. Armand thinks that he's a movie star because he doesn't know the difference between YouTube and the movies. Jen and I are a little more reasonable, and we just think it might be a fun way for you to watch the show. Give 30 MBC a watch on YouTube, and we'll see you next week on the show.